So talking about the destruction of interstate highways, byways, and bridges, how much further off the Mississippi River would we have to go, either east or west? Would we have to be going about 200 miles from that until we find intact roads? And what's your analysis of the destruction zone, and how many miles east or west would we have to go to get a transportation network up and running?
Well, again, the 8 states involved, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, northwestern Georgia, northern Alabama, Mississippi, parts of northern Louisiana. So 8 to 10 states are directly involved. 8 are core states that will be heavily damaged. So you won't be able to travel in most of those states on any interstate system. And that's very sad, but what you're talking about are massive quantities of products, supplies, fuel, and foodstuffs that are now traveling those routes that simply won't be available. That will force that traffic to go far north and far south, and you're talking a lot more than 200 miles. You're talking about having to get close to Chicago for a northern route, and close to New Orleans for the southern route. And even I-10, the road, the primary interstate east to west that goes just north of New Orleans, again, it's already so heavily traveled that a single accident can back up traffic for 10 or 20 miles. You simply won't be able to divert the traffic that's now going through the New Madrid Fault, either toward the Chicago area or the New Orleans area, without creating massive nationwide interstate traffic jams. So it's not going to be an easy period. So even if you do get crops loaded into trucks that are now on the interstate, much longer to get where they're going with nationwide interstate backups in place.
Yeah, and that comes back to a lot of the videos I talk about. You need to reach out to your community and know the people around you. So if something like this does happen, that you have a support network. There's no surviving this on your own. And right. I get people coming saying, well, I'm going to run off into the woods and survive. You know, during the 1930s Great Depression, everything was hunted out at that point.
Right.
And it just comes down to, you need a community to survive, not only mentally. You can't live in the woods for 50 years by yourself. You will go insane. But you really need a group of people around you that you trust, you know, and then I really think that this is going to spur some kind of transition in the way we think. We're entering into a new paradigm anyway with the grand solar minimum approaching, just the way we're going to have to adjust our lifestyles slowly over this. You know, it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years. I believe the first wake-up call for the world is next year or in 2019 with the crop losses. But a giant catastrophic quake, that's an instant wake up. I hope everybody has at least some preparations in place. You know, you got a slow wake up call coming for the grand solar minimum, but you got an instant wake up with this huge tectonic event.
And unfortunately, you're right. Dr. Choi, one of the co-authors of the book with me, who's in Australia, he's also the director of research for the International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center. We've discussed many times what it would take for people to finally wake up. And we focused on those 2 things: catastrophic crop loss here in the US due to cold, and one of these catastrophic quakes wiping out much of California's infrastructure, or the central US, or Alaska, or South Carolina, or Puerto Rico, as we talk about in our book. That's the nature of humanity, and especially during this age where we have heavily biased, misleading media in place, in cooperation with a heavily biased, misleading government, as we had during the Obama administration. Regrettably, what could have been one of the greatest presidencies ever fell upon a strategy of deceiving the people as to what was really happening in order to achieve political objectives. There's no question that the sun is the primary driver of climate change, yet somehow the Obama administration and others at the UN and throughout Europe and China have been pushing this greenhouse gas theory, which we know very well has routinely failed to produce reliable results in climate prediction. Whereas, on the other hand, solar-driven climate models like our RC theory have been eminently accurate for years. Yet we still see the government, and the current government, which is just getting started under President Trump, has a lot of house cleaning to do to get rid of those scientists and organizations that rely on models that are anywhere from 200 to 600% in error. That's incredible, but that's what's happening in our government. And we need to get back to solar-driven models, which have been shown to be well over 80% accurate in predicting climate variation. So another sea change is going to be called for in our government and how it acts and reacts to the real facts behind what's causing climate change and the ill effects that are coming with this new cold climate.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. The agenda has been pushed forward. I mean, NASA predicting there were literally double the amount of average sunspots, which you called on the money. You had put your forecast out a couple years beforehand, and when it came down into it, you were the only one that was correct. How can all these high-level people be paid so much money from the European Space Agency and from NASA to put out these forecasts that are literally 50%, 100% wrong? They were calling what, something like 140 or 150, and you pegged it right at 174?
Yes, NASA and NOAA, who every year get together and come up with a central prediction on solar activity based on sunspots, had said back in 2006 and 2007 that the solar cycle number 24, the one that we just are coming out of now, would peak in 2011 with at least 145 to 160 sunspot count. I contacted NASA's chief of solar physics, the primary office at Marshall Space Flight Center, and said, according to my calculations based on the RC theory, we'll have no more than 74 sunspots at peak, and it'll be after 2011. Well, they were courteous, but then they hung up on me. But as you correctly indicated, those who've been following my work independently have verified that, yes, I was correct, and probably only a few others throughout the United States. But again, even then, going into 2007 when I made the prediction, and certainly during the Obama administration, no scientist was willing to step up and say, oh, by the way, CO2 doesn't control the climate, the sun does, and we better start putting money into solar-driven climate research. And yes, even though I was correct in predicting the solar energy output for solar cycle 24, when NASA and NOAA missed it by over 100%, that is not me. It's merely the fact that when you follow the sun, the primary driver of climate change, you're going to have a more predictable future ahead.
So if you're going to take us out into solar cycle 25 and 26, what kind of average are we for solar cycle 25, next cycle?
Well, we're certainly looking at least 2 cycles over the next 22 to 33 years that are on average 50 sunspots at peak. That is at least a Dalton minimum class solar hibernation, or our Russian colleagues and others in Europe are saying we're going to 0 or near 0 sunspots over these next 2 solar cycles. And if that's the case, then we'll have a little ice age, and the global effects will truly be catastrophic with massive routine crop losses every year. It's because of these 2 theories. Either one is bad. The Russian model is catastrophically bad, but even the Dalton minimum class of solar hibernation for the next minimum will truly be a difficult time. By the way, that new minimum also has a name like Maunder or Dalton. The new minimum is called the Eddy minimum, EDDY, named after a prominent, very good solar physicist by the name of Dr. Jack Eddy. I had also recommended that the next minimum be given his name, and the solar physics community was pretty much on board with it anyway. But the Eddy minimum that's showing the same kinds of effects that we experienced and predicted for a Dalton class minimum. So within the next first 3 years after the solar cycle 25 begins, we're talking 2020 to 2023. Within that period, we will know for sure whether it's going to be a Dalton class minimum or a Maunder class minimum. So we're talking about only a few years from now, knowing with great certainty how cold it's going to be and how massive the crop damage will be. But it's not good news either way. The good news is that people like me exist in every country, and they're trying to convince their people and their government, and people like you who use the internet to communicate the truth about the climate, to get prepared. The more people we have speaking out, and the more David Dubines we have on the web telling people to get prepared, the better off we'll be. I'd rather have a prepared people going into a dangerous climate period than an unprepared people going into that same dangerous period.